As dark of a series as Berserk is overall, there are parts of it that feel way worse than the rest of the series. For instance, much of the Fantasia arc reads like a typical fantasy story, what with all its elves and golems and a magical island filled with love and light, but on the other hand, the Black Swordsman arc reads like a dystopian novel straight out of the mind of Clive Barker, and the Golden Age kind of balances these two aspects by making the series a mix of fantasy, drama, romance, and horror. But if there's one storyline from Berserk that combines all of these aspects into a hyper-focused mini-arc, then it's gotta be the Lost Children chapter, which picks up right after the conclusion of the Golden Age. This arc has everything that Berserk promised to its readers when it first began publication, and then some. That's why in this video we're going to do a thorough retrospective on the same, because we feel like it deserves one. Without further ado, let's get right into it. This is the Lost Children arc retrospective explained. It begins with Jill, how Lost Children connects the Golden Age and Black Swordsman arcs. The Lost Children arc was conceived as the bridge that closed the gap between the two major story arcs that preceded it, the Black Swordsman arc and the Golden Age arc. From both a narrative and tonal standpoint, those two arcs couldn't be further from each other because the Golden Age was more of a traditional medieval fantasy story. It began with the tale of how Guts was born, the early misfortunes of his life, how they shaped his worldview, and when he started to change. Joining up with the Band of the Falcon was a major turning point for him, because that's when he transformed from a feral warrior into one with actual sense and empathy. Though that might have been debated by Casca early on in the Golden Age, as the story progressed, even she came to see that Guts wasn't a mad dog, but a supremely confident individual who could solo an entire unit of 100 knights, even on an off day. We can kind of divide the Golden Age into two genres because it begins and ends in trauma and horror, but the middle bit, the meat of its narrative, is all about love, loyalty, politics, and power. We see how Guts rises through the ranks of the Falcons and carves out a legacy for himself. We see Griffith's power grab both on and off the field of battle. We see his unromantic seduction of Princess Charlotte and the seeds of the romance between Guts and Casca being sown. And we see Guts' personal relationship with guys like Pippin and Judo blossom, where he once preferred roaming the streets as a lone wolf. In many ways, Golden Age Guts is the original Guts because he wasn't always the cynical ant crusher that we met during the Black Swordsman arc. The eclipse changed him completely, which was documented quite well by the final quarter of the Golden Age, but the question of reconciling that arc's ending with the Black Swordsman arc's ending still loomed large over Miura's head, because the Guts we saw in the former and the Guts we experienced through the latter were two completely different people. So what did he do to bridge that gap between personalities? Well, he used children, of course, because children represent the purity and innocence that Guts never got to experience when he was growing up. Miura uses them as a plot device to show us exactly where Guts' moral compass lies during the Black Swordsman arc, because he might laugh off the collateral damage he causes to adults during his crusade against demonkind, but when it comes to children, that mask drops off his face and we see his authentic self, even if just for a moment. In the second ever published chapter of Berserk, titled The Brand, we see Guts taking shelter and passage with an old man and his granddaughter whose name was Colette. He warns them that he's bad news because come nightfall, their lives will all be in danger. But when sweet Colette insists on helping him, he gives in and accepts, finally getting some well-earned rest in the process. That's what makes his eventual killing of Colette so traumatic, because he doesn't do it on purpose, he does it because reflexes are stronger than conscious thought. As Guts' nightly terrors begin, he realizes that the dead spirits aren't just possessing corpses and skeletons, they've possessed Colette as well. At first, he's shocked by this development and doesn't know how to react, but then she stabs him with a sword, and his body instantly dissects her in half. When he realizes what he's done, he throws up and is filled with a renewed sense of rage that allows him to make it through the rest of the night, but the guilt remains with him. He then meets Teresia during his hunt for the slug count, and initially, Guts treats her like collateral. He uses her as a hostage and meat shield to coerce the count into leaving himself open, and then lands a fatal attack combination on him. But after meeting the God Hand for the first time in 2 years, failing to get his hands on Griffith, and nearly being dragged to hell while Teresia and her father grapple with the deepest moral questions plaguing the soul, Guts' stance towards her softens. He gives her a knife when she says she wants to kill herself, arguing she'd either go to heaven for being a kid or be reunited with her parents in hell. Either way, it's a win-win situation for her, so she should do whatever she wants. Then, when When she declares she'll hate him and kill him for bringing this nightmare to their doorstep, he accepts her challenge, but appears quite saddened by it because he didn't want to orphan this girl. Guts knows what being an orphan feels like, and he would never consciously inflict that pain onto someone else, yet that's exactly what he does to Teresia, so his regret and guilt is plain to see. Miura knew that by using these two pillars that demonstrated his morality early on in the series, he could connect both to the Golden Age arc and the Black Swordsman arc seamlessly, so that's why he brings Jill into the picture. Jill is a girl Guts encounters in a forest under circumstances that are quite similar to his first meeting with Puck. She'd been kidnapped by bandits who intended to sell her to a slave trader. One of the bandits got curious about her youth, so he wanted to assault her before they sold her, but then he heard a story about the tree they were taking shelter under and got curious about it. See, this tree was supposedly involved in rituals where people nailed their entrails to its bark and walked around it, and the bandits wanted to test it out on Jill. This is also quite similar to the circumstances of Guts' birth, because he was born from his mother's corpse, which hung off a tree bearing the bodies of several people that had been executed via hanging. Before the bandits could satiate their curiosity, they woke up Guts, who asked them if the story they'd told was real or not. When they confirmed it was, he simply got annoyed with them because he knew he wouldn't be getting any shut-eye, at least not anytime soon. When night fell and his brand resonated with the malice permeating the tree, it came alive and tried to eat everyone in its vicinity. The bandits weren't so lucky because Guts treated them the same way he treated those thugs from Coca who were torturing Puck, but Jill was, because whether he intended to do so or not, Guts protected her from the evil Flora until the sun came up. This is something he was unable to do in the Black Swordsman arc, but he was successful in accomplishing during the Golden Age arc because it reminded us of his 100-man Slayer stand. That night, he fought to protect Casca, and he won because of that. So Jill isn't just a reminder of the children he wasn't able to protect, she's also representative of the one person that he did protect, Casca. Her introduction bridges the gap between the Black Swordsman and Golden Age arcs perfectly because it retains Guts' character design from the latter while bringing in the edge from the former, and that's exactly what a good bridging arc should do. Things get wild after this, because right after confirming Guts' morality, Miura makes him question it with the first apostle he introduces post-time skip, Rosine. The biggest moral quandary of Guts' soul, the moment he crossed the line. Like we mentioned in the previous section, the one group of people Guts always draws a line with is kids. After protecting Jill, he asks her to take him to her village so he can get some supplies and compensation out of them, but they end up reacting rather violently to his presence, and what's odder is they do it not because of Guts, but because of Puck. Turns out the entire area has been hounded by killer elves for quite a while now, and these aren't elves like Puck. They kill and devour livestock as well as human beings, and they kidnap the children of those who aren't careful enough and don't lock their doors when they arrive. Initially, Guts thought that this was just some sort of supernatural occurrence where a few of Puck's kind went rogue. Jill directed him towards a windmill where he could take shelter for the night, going through his usual motions. Jill would visit Guts in defiance of her parents, especially her father, who reminds us a lot of Gambino. This guy used to be a soldier, and now all he does is drink and abuse his family and prattle on about the good old days. Hell, he even lets his friends assault Jill, like how Gambino sold Guts out to Donovan at the beginning of the Golden Age arc. We don't get to see it because Jill bars her door and ensures she doesn't fall asleep before the morning, because that's how dangerous her home life has become. But come morning, she stacks up some food for Guts and goes to see him in the windmill, where she finally closes her eyes and gets some rest in his lap, feeling safer with a walking, talking arsenal rather than in her own home. When she wakes up, she tells Guts about the village's misfortunes, and by a stroke of causality, the murder elves show up right as they were discussing their existence. This is where the line between morality and vengeance starts getting blurred, because as soon as he feels his brand bleeding, Guts knows that these things are pseudo-apostles. He gets that sickening smile on his face that has since become iconic, because he knows he has to kill these bugs before they kidnap more children, and to do that, he uses a boy from Jill's village as bait, like he used Teresia in the Black Swordsman arc. Guts uses the kid to lure the pseudo-elves into a barn where they think they've cornered him. They unleash their demonic forms to kill Guts and fulfill their mission of kidnapping the boy he's dangling off his sword, but before they can, Guts unloads a pitcher full of gunpowder in the barn, which, combined with the dry hay stacked inside, turns into quite a potent flammable device. He lights them all on fire while escaping with Bait Boy, and when they see the barn engulfed in flames, Guts tells the kid to take a good look at how well bugs burn. He'd figured out from Jill's story that these kids are probably the kids that the apostle that's leading them has kidnapped, but it didn't lessen the impact on his psyche any more to see them convert back into human form. Guts no-sold it when he got surrounded by Jill's villagers, and he used her as a bargaining chip to make his escape. But when he got far away from that place and told Jill to go back, he knew that a reckoning was coming for him. That reckoning reached him in the form of the souls of the children he slew by burning them to a crisp, and Guts was in no condition to fight any spirits that night, let alone ones that pressed right on his guilt button. That's because he'd already been poisoned by their leader, Rosine, who's the only apostle from the Golden Age we see return during the Conviction arc. We should have guessed that Rickart's queer elf phobia would have been turned into a major plot point by Miura after Ricky survived the pre-eclipse snack that several of Berserk's apostles went on. They killed the reserve forces of the Band of the Falcon, and Rickard alone survived because Skull Knight intervened. The attack began after he saw Rosine, and from that moment forward, Ricky developed a fear of elves so strong that he would get nervous around Puck. But for us readers, it was a sign that this massive elf queen apostle would become important down the line. That happens during the Lost Children arc, where, after Guts takes out several of her quote-unquote children, Rosine shows herself. She uses her near supersonic speed to outpace Guts and leave his body brimming with the poison from her stinger. But then, something complicated happens. As he goes to attack Rosine, Guts notices that she has Jill in her arms. Though he claims that he doesn't care who gets in the way of his job, he clearly does, because he doesn't fatally injure Rosine then and there, as Jill would have been caught in the crossfire. He wonders why he hesitated from cutting both of them in half, but he already knows the answer. Also, this is the second time that Guts encounters an apostle with a connection to a human being, which throws into question his moral stance on the former. After the eclipse, he doesn't really care whether you were once a human or not. If you became an apostle, it means you chose to become a demon and you chose evil. In his mind, he has the license to kill anyone inundated with the power of evil, but we learn the truth about Rosine's ascent to apostlhood later on in this arc. She didn't choose to become one because she was evil to begin with. She was just a vulnerable, outdoorsy girl who happened to have circumstances that mirrored Jill's. Though her father never allowed her to be abused by his friends, he dished out beatings himself and never quite believed that she was his child. This is because Rosine was conceived from sexual assault, and though her dad knew her mother couldn't have done anything to change that fate, he still blamed the two of them for bringing shame to his name. In many ways, he pushed Rosine into becoming an apostle with his abusive behavior, and this wasn't a choice she was even aware of making. Rosine just thought that the Behelit would make all the bad stuff go away. She had no idea it would turn her into a demon, and moreover, her transformation is inspired by a story that can be applied to Guts, as well as his own child, which is where his moral quandary gets blown wide open. In Jill's village, there's a folktale about a boy called Picaf the Outcast. Back when elves still inhabited the place that's now known as the Misty Valley, Picaf fell ill with a disease that couldn't be cured by human medicine. By the way, the Misty Valley itself is a reference to another elven dwelling from Berserk, the Ore Cave that's near Godot's hut, which also became Casca's home during Guts' time as the Black Swordsman. But coming back to the point, Picaf's parents, concerned about their son's health, took him to the Misty Valley, hoping that the elves could cure him. They did, but in the process, Picaf turned into a human-elf hybrid, cursed to never belong to either community. When he returned to his village, the kids shunned him because of his green skin and red eyes, so he resolved to become part of the elven community. But when he finally reached the Misty Valley of his own accord, the elves rejected him too, leaving Picaf red-eyed because of the tears he had shed. When he went back to his village, he realized that several years had passed and that no one knew he was alive anymore. Rosine identified with this story on a personal level, and when things finally spiraled out of control at home, she actually started to believe that she herself was Picaf. But if you zoom out and take a look at this story from a bird's eye view, it can also be applied to both Guts and his demon child. Guts is a man who was born so close to death that he excels at escaping it. Those aren't our words, those are Skull Knight's, the man who imparted Guts' fate unto him. When the eclipse happened, Guts became a man diseased with vengeance, and the brand of sacrifice made him a struggler of not one, but two realms. He was cursed from that day forward to never live a normal life, because he'd constantly be attacked by astral creatures when in darkness, and he would never be able to normally interact with humans again. Though his eyes are mostly red with the color of rage, Guts has also shed tears like Picaf at realizing that he himself wasn't going to be human anymore, at least not in the way he understood humanity. And the Outcast is a title that suits him as much as the title Struggler does. As for his demon child, this baby is practically a symbol for the many conflicting emotions that Guts experiences all throughout his life, where it's both his and not his at the same time. When Guts slept with Casca, he wasn't aware that shooting his load conceives babies. Even Casca didn't realize she was in the early stages of pregnancy when she set out to rescue Griffith. So when that man assaulted her and did exactly what Guts did, it was bound to break Casca's mind. But that isn't all there is to her most traumatic memory. Unlike Guts' seed, which is human, Griffith's seed in his form as femto was inhuman, so when it mixed with the fetus growing inside her, it corrupted it into a half-human, half-demon hybrid. When this baby was born, Guts immediately tried to kill it because he just saw it as a demon with a cancerous growth on its face, tendrils for limbs, and a tail between its legs. But when he realized that it was his child that had been corrupted into this monstrosity, even though he felt conflicted about what he wanted to do with it, Guts still tried killing the boy. He saw it as being diseased with demonic influence, and whenever the kid showed up on nights of the full moon in front of him, Guts would shoo it away, either with words or actions. The demon child belonged to the astral world for most of its life cycle because of its half-demon nature, but at the end of the day, it was half-human as well, and therefore it longed for its parents and could be killed. Unlike the God Hand member that changed him, for that man was now a metaphysical concept. The demon child shows up every now and again to test Guts' morality and see if he's actually willing to accept his role in the misery he suffers from. In fact, after killing all those pseudo-elves in that barn fire and being poisoned by Rosine, Guts finds a cave where he eats a venomous snake and some cocoa leaves to keep himself awake while his body counteracts Rosine's poison. That night, the spirits that attack him are those of children, like we mentioned, but he also faces another non-spiritual entity, his demon child. The kid shows up in the middle of the bonfire that Guts had lit to keep himself warm, and he immediately blames it for bringing all those dead children's souls along with him. Guts spends the rest of the night fighting each and every one of them, as his baby just disappears, in order to maintain his grip on sanity, but it's clear that he's losing it. This is the same guy who didn't want to put kids in harm's way because he saw a part of himself in them, and now, suddenly, he thought it was okay to kill them because they'd been corrupted by evil energy. Guts crossed his own line when he lit that barn aflame, and his subconscious mind knows it as well, which brings us to the final third of this retrospective. The Beast Within and the Beast Without. How Guts has changed from the Golden Age. One of the reasons Guts is called the Struggler is the fact he has to struggle against evil astral entities for the rest of his life until he manages to kill them. But another reason, and it's a big one in our books, is that he has to struggle with himself to remain human. Throughout his journey in life, Guts has struggled to stay barely afloat. He really has no idea what normalcy is like, and even when he got a semblance of it during the Golden Age arc, he felt like he didn't deserve it. That's part of the reason he leaves the Band of the Falcon, because he feels like friendship and a regular life aren't things that are cut out for him. But even though he pushes away the people that care about him, that's not what makes Guts a beast. What made him a beast was the eclipse, because it rolled up all of his childhood traumas into one giant ball and shoved it down his throat, while it also took an eye and an arm and the love of his life away from him. It was that experience of utter helplessness in the face of something so much greater and more powerful than him that made Guts shed all his human inhibitions and become, for lack of a better term, a rabid wolf. All he wants is a fight where he can verify his own existence by reaching the brink of death. All he craves is a place where he can slaughter to his heart's content without needing to hold back. The Lost Children arc tested that limit of his with each fight he engaged in because he had to hold back for the children's sake. Yet, at the same time, he knew he was fighting demons, so why should he have held back in the first place? Guts' monstrosity is juxtaposed by the very human concerns and desires of Jill, who just wants an escape from her everyday life because that life is hell for her. She agrees to let Rosine turn her into a pseudo-apostle because they go flying, and Jill realizes she loves the feeling, even if it isn't going to be truly her own. Flying is something that all human beings want to do on some level because it represents so many things. Power and control, yes, but also freedom, and that's what Jill wants most. She wants to be free of her ties to her village, and even after Puck tries to tell her that she is making a big mistake trusting Rosine, Jill initially wants to go through with her plan of being turned into a pseudo. It's only when she sees Rosine's elf minions playing war in real life that she realizes what she's in for, because those transformed kids were killing and violating each other like real humans do all the time. She became scared and was forcefully put into a trance by Rosine, where Jill was covered in a cocoon and was going to go to sleep or waking up as something else. That didn't happen because Guts showed up just in time, but his entrance made him feel like more of a monster than Rosine. While Jill and Puck were dealing with the Misty Valley elves, Guts was chopping Rosine's guardians down to size. He managed to kill most of them, but 2 gave him a particularly hard time. Those 2 were so fast and had such thick armor respectively that they nearly killed Guts during the fight, so he ended up innovating a new maneuver, the cannon spin slash, to deal with the targets both in front of and behind him. At this point, he was exhausted and had already lost a lot of blood, but Guts is the kind of guy who doesn't let dizziness stop him from winning. He took it upon himself to enter Rosine's birthing grounds, the place where she creates her elves, and set it on fire. He got caught up in the flames himself, but he had the gnarliest solution for that problem. He cut open a cocoon and allowed its fluids to douse him, and in the process, caught the body inside it with his bare teeth. In that moment, Jill thought Guts looked more like a monster than Rosine, and she wasn't wrong. He was there to kill her childhood friend, backstory and tragic circumstances be damned, and he was going to see this job through to the end because he was a demon hunter. When Rosine transformed into her proper demonic form, Guts struggled against her speed because she was so fast she broke the sound barrier. It took him a couple of tries to get used to her speed, and the way he worked around it was as hardcore as anything we'd ever seen. He allowed Rosine to pierce her antenna into his flesh arm while his metal arm deflected it. Then, when they were safely in the sky, he unloaded his arm cannon right into Rosine's abdomen, not caring about the long fall that could have killed him as easily as Rosine. When he got back up, Guts had broken bones, he was close to backing out, and he was unhinged in a way we've only seen him get whenever he's around Griffith. But after realizing that his target was still breathing, Guts put aside every shred of morality in his body and went in for the kill. This time, he didn't even care that Jill was shielding the fallen Rosine, because in his mind, Rosine needed to die for the crime of being an apostle and participating in the eclipse. But the truth is, in her final moments, Rosine recalled her humanity and accepted her actions with as much grace as she could. The only thing that stopped Guts from killing both of those children was the intervention of the Holy Iron Chain Knights, who had been following his trail of destruction for 2 years because they forced him to flee. As he made his escape, Guts got separated from Puck for a moment because he was still concerned about Rosine's safety. In that moment, Puck was more like Guts than Guts himself because he wanted to ensure that Jill didn't regret returning home to her parents. She'd asked Guts if he would take her with him, monsters be damned, but when Guts showed her the truth about his world, she hesitated. He told her that she wouldn't find salvation with him, that the only thing he had to offer her was darkness and cold, hard reality. And after seeing the spirits that flocked to him like ravenous moths to a flame, Jill finally understood. As Puck finished up his conversation with her, Guts was struggling to make it through the Misty Valley, and that's when his Beast of Darkness was born and took shape. The Beast is a manifestation of his worst thoughts and feelings, his malice given form, and it taunted him with the knowledge that he'd finally crossed the line he swore not to cross. He killed kids, and though he justified it with their status as apostles, they were kids nonetheless. The Beast whispered that the blood would flow and the darkness would grow blacker in Guts' heart until he got what he really wanted, Griffith. Until that day, it would always remind him of his true nature, of the beast he really is, and as if in response to the malice, Guts falls face first on the ground and is swarmed by dead spirits. At this point, Puck is done with his conversation with Jill, so he rushes over to Guts and actually helps him out for a change. He takes care of all the dead spirits and forces Guts to acknowledge his worth and the fact that he's still alive because of him, and instead of being his usual grumpy self, Guts was so shaken up by the beast's appearance that he gives up, allows Puck to stay in his satchel, and calls him by his name for the first time during their acquaintance. In a matter of a few pages, Miura shows us both sides of this man we've been following for 30 plus years. He shows us the ugly side that's ready to give into the darkness at the drop of a pin because his enemies are in the darkness. But we also get to see his softer side, especially through his interactions with Puck. The elf wasn't joking when he said that the only reason Guts was still himself was because he was around, and Guts finally acknowledges that fact as the most intense mini-arc in Berserk comes to an end. What happens next is something we're all aware of. The Holy Iron Chain Knights attack and capture him, and Guts escapes using a combination of guile and his knightly terrors, but that happens after the Lost Children arc is finished. In this arc, we see Guts grappling with the many limitations of his own person, and that's what makes it one of the best story beats in Berserk. The idea that he's not just struggling with what's outside of him, but also what's inside his heart, is something the series has honed in on quite tightly, and anyone who's read the latest chapters of Berserk will know that this thematic push and pull forms the core of Miura's masterpiece. The Lost Children arc doesn't just bridge the gap between the two arcs that preceded it, it also sets up the future of the series by showing us Skull Knight eating Rosine's Behelit and calling her battleground with Guts a land scorched by hellfire, because that's exactly the kind of trial our protagonist is going through. And for that, we tip our hats to Miura Sensei, because he was a master at telling stories within stories within stories, and keeping all of it fresh despite them following the same structure. Conclusion. We hope you guys enjoyed this retrospective on the Lost Children arc, because it low-key is one of the best arcs in the whole series. It does such a good job of bridging the time gap and reminding us of old elements from the story while introducing new ones as well. Let us know what you think about the Lost Children arc down in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more Berserk content like this. We'll see you guys in the next one, but until then, stay safe and remember to keep on struggling, strugglers.